I'm sure this is a thought that's crossed your mind over the past few days. If the current border face-off between the Indian and the Chinese armies leads to a shootout which has an escalatory spiral which cannot be controlled, and there is a military confrontation, how does the Indian Army and Air Force compare with the Chinese Army and Air Force that are up against us? What we'll do over the next few minutes is give you a full sense of the force comparison between the Indian military and the Chinese military. Net, we will look at the Indian Army all along the northern, the central and the eastern command, and the Chinese army that's up against them. The Chinese have 2,04,000 to 2,34,000 troops against the Indian Army, and the Indian Army has about 2,25,000 troops dedicated and deployed to fight the Chinese army. Let's now show you how the Air Force compares. If you look at the Indian Air Force that's up against the Chinese army, we have 270 fighter aircraft deployed against the Chinese Air Force. The Chinese have 157 aircraft deployed against the Indian Air Force. I want to explain the basis of this study in case you're wondering where all this data is coming from. The data comes from a study done at the Harvard Kennedy School by a fellow at the Stimson Center, which is a think tank, and what this really does is it looks at the strategic postures of India and China. It's authored by Frank O'Donnell and Dr. Alexander Boltras. This is the only open source study available which looks at the Indian army and compares it with the Chinese army that's up against it. So it analyzes location data, geography data, sector wise command data, and is based on intelligence documents publicly sourced from various newspaper articles and magazines which deal with such affairs. So none of this is top secret, none of this is classified, but it's significant because for the first time we're putting out two audiences watching on India Today right now a comparison between the Indian army and the Chinese army. And why this is significant, and you'll see this as I go sector to sector, is because the end message is very reassuring, and I'll explain that to you in just a moment. So what we'll do first is we'll start by comparing the Indian army, which is deployed in three sectors against the Chinese army, the northern army, the central army command, and then the eastern army command. So we'll start with the northern army command, which is in the Ladakh sector and in the Himachal Pradesh sector, largely deployed against the Pakistanis on the line of control, but the current focus is on the forces that are deployed against China. So in the northern army, there are 34,000 troops deployed in 14 Corps against the Chinese. Then there's the central army command, which is in Uttarakhand, which has 15,500 troops deployed against the Chinese army, and then the eastern army command, which is the bulk of India's fighting force against the Chinese, which has 1,75,000 troops. Let's compare this with what we're up against, because this provides a total of about 2,25,000 Indian army troops who are dedicated and deployed against the Chinese army. Now let's go across to the sectors of the Chinese army that are up against India. We'll start with the Tibet military district, which is the area that's marked out here in red, which is 40,000 Chinese troops. Apart from the Tibet military district, China relies for its defense against India on troops who are deployed in the Xinjiang military district, which is 70,000 troops, and then there is the larger Western Theatre Command. China, remember, has 5 theatre commands. The Western Theatre Command that's dedicated against that's not dedicated against India, that's aligned against India, and that has 90,000 to 1,25,000 troops, giving them a total of 2,04,000 to 2,34,000. Now if you look at comparing the Indian army that's deployed against China, you have 2,25,000 troops dedicated and deployed just against the Chinese army, and as I showed you in the graph that I just put out, these 2,04,000 to 2,34,000 Chinese troops are actually deployed partly in Tibet, partly in Xinjiang, where there are local uprisings, so they can't all be moved and pushed against the Indian army, whereas the 2,25,000 Indian troops have just one mission alone, which is to defend India against Chinese aggression. So that's the broad sense of how the armies compare. Let's now take you through how the Air Force compares. So let's start with the Western Air Command. This is actually north, but it's called the Western Air Command because there are air bases in Ambala, in Adampur, in Punjab, Pathankot, Srinagar and Leh, which is the thrice air base. Now the Western Air Command has 75 fighter aircraft, 34 ground attack aircraft. So this is the Air Force that's deployed in this sector and can be used against the Chinese Air Force if required. From the Western Air Command, let's now come to the Central Air Command, which has Bareilly, Gwalior and Gorakhpur, where we've got 94 fighter aircraft and 34 ground attack aircraft. From the Central Air Command, I want to come now to the Eastern Air Command, which is Arunachal Pradesh, Assam, which has Jalpaiguri, Tezpur and Chabua as the main airfields. You've got 101 fighter aircraft, and I'm not looking at the advanced landing grounds, the ALGs, which have been activated in a big way by the Indian Air Force across the three commands, so that if required, right in the depth areas of the border, we can land equipment, we can land our transport aircraft, we can move men and machines very quickly. So the Western Air Command, 75 fighters, 34 ground attack aircraft, 94 fighters, 34 ground attack aircraft in the Central Air Command, and in the Eastern Air Command you got 101 fighters. Let's now see what we're up against on the Chinese side. So if you go across the border and see what we're up against, as I said, in China it's the Western Theatre Command that we're up against. They don't have, unlike India, we've got three separate commands to deal with the Chinese. They've got one Western Theatre Command which has 157 fighter aircraft, but they have some other weapon systems like 20 precision strike unmanned aerial vehicles which don't have any fighter pilots in them, but you control them sitting in centers. You would have seen this in various films. Then you've got reconnaissance vehicles, which are reconnaissance UAVs, which are very significant. They've got 12 ground attack UAVs. Then they've got 12 precision strike unmanned aerial vehicles, and they've got 8 reconnaissance and electronic warfare systems. Again, crucial components of the air fleet against India. So 157 fighter aircraft. Let's compare this with how the Indian Air Force stacks up against them. So here it is, 270 fighter aircraft, 68 ground fighter aircraft for India, and you got 157 fighters and a fleet of strike unmanned aerial vehicles and reconnaissance and electronic warfare systems that the Chinese have. I want to show you now what the capabilities of the Indian nuclear forces are. So China has, and this is really the bulk of their strike force, which is 104 missiles, a key part of the Chinese armor which can really cross all parts of India. Then you've got, in India, we've got Agni 3 launcher systems which can cover virtually the entire Chinese mainland. There's no part of China, including Beijing, that we can't strike from within India, which gives us very strong second strike capabilities. The Chinese have intercontinental ballistic missiles with a range of 11,000, 7,000 kilometers, which really gives them the ability not just of being able to take on India, but even the United States if it were to come to that. And missiles like the 12X DF-21 has a range of 2,150 kilometers, can easily strike Delhi. And India, of course, also has aircraft which can be deployed like the Mirage with nuclear weapon payloads and can be directed against China. So here's the net summary of this entire study, which is a public source document which we've collated and brought together for you, that while nobody wants war and everyone wants the Chinese army to back out at a time of a pandemic, the last thing you want is military escalation. If push comes to shove, the people of India should know that the Indian army, the army and the Air Force are more than equipped to ensure that the Chinese get more than a bloody nose. This is not the India of 1962, and that really is a scar we need to leave very far behind, because if the Chinese mess with us, we have more than the ability to do very significant and substantial damage.
Hello everyone, this is Rahul Kamal here. Hope you enjoyed this video. For the latest news and analysis, like and subscribe the India Today YouTube channel, and don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated.